Morning. Today, I'm going to be talking about an issue that doesn't just impact the United States, it affects us and your generations, me and you alike. Today, I'll be talking about the decline in patriotism. So I think these two images pretty much speak for themselves. They depict one of the most horrid and tragic days in United States history, the September 11th attacks. We all know what happened, we all know what transpired. And I think when we look at the impacts, we see changes in policy, changes in law, even entered a war. What I think often gets forgotten is what rose from the ashes of Ground Zero itself, something truly inspiring. I think we saw the United States at its most united. Oftentimes in history, we see when people or groups of people face adversity, face moments of crisis, they rally together behind a single message. I think this is what we saw in America. Nothing like this had ever been seen before. It was truly a watershed moment, but the trivial and sort of minor disagreements of the past seemed a little bit less meaningful in a moment of a true threat. And I think when we look at the United States, we saw them rally behind a single fight and a single message. And I have the statistical data to back this up. Pew Research Center, a nonpartisan organization, did polling in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. And what they found is that 79% of Americans wove an American flag outside of their homes, and 62% of people said they felt more patriotic as a result of the attacks. And we even see this through other spectrums. For instance, President Bush's approval rating went up incredibly high after the attacks. People's trust in media went up, and people even relied on religion more. But what also happened was that Americans didn't just come together and sing Kumbaya. When people undergo an attack, when they feel that they're threatened, they want to seek vengeance. And this is exactly what happened. Over 180,000 men and women joined the armed forces after 9/11 as a result of the attacks. And the public was mainly in support. Pew Research also did this study, and they found that in mid-September 2001, 77% of people favored U.S. military action, including the deployment of ground forces. And for the first 2 or so years of the war, this was the main sentiment. Morale was high, and people were generally in support of a military deployment. But where I think we start to see the shift comes in February of 2003, when Secretary of State Colin Powell takes a stand at the United Nations, and he makes use of the phrase weapons of mass destruction 17 times. This, of course, was in reference to Saddam Hussein and Iraq, and he was basically arguing for why the United States should invade Iraq. And this leads us to March of 2003, when President Bush officially declares war on Iraq. What was once just a military operation into Afghanistan has turned into a full-fledged campaign into the Middle East, what he himself described as a war on terror. So you may be asking, what does this have to do with the decline of patriotism? Well, first off, this was based on lies. When the United States invaded Iraq, they did not find weapons of mass destruction. And the United States, although they may deny it, they knew this at the time. They knew that Iraq did not have what we claimed that they had, but yet they still went ahead with the attacks. And you may be asking, well, how did they get away with this? How did they get away with such blatantly lying? Well, I look at these statistics. These are all taken from Pew right after 9/11, and it shows that 87% of people felt anger, 77% of people were frightened, and 71% of people were depressed. The United States knew that citizens were emotionally drained. They were searching for something to grasp onto, and they knew that they could capitalize on this. They knew that they could emotionally manipulate people into fighting for a war that they knew nothing about. If you ask most Americans where Iraq or Afghanistan was on a map, they probably couldn't point it out. But they knew what the Twin Towers were, they knew where New York City was, and they knew what happened, and they were looking for something to grasp onto. Joseph E. Stiglitz, who's a famous economist, he wrote a book titled The $3 Trillion War, which basically looks at the cost of the Iraq War, and this is what he found. At its lowest estimates, $3 trillion were spent, 7,000 U.S. military personnel were lost, and over 20 years were invested in the war. But what can't be quantified is the lack of trust that was fostered between the government and its people. Americans were lied to, and whatever you say about Americans, you can't deny the fact that they take honesty very seriously. So this leads us to the value of patriotism, which has dropped drastically throughout the years. And when you think about it, it makes sense. Americans were lied to and they were mistreated, and it cost us lives, it cost us money, and it cost us almost our own personal liberties. David Brooks, who's a famous columnist for the New York Times, he said, "The story of American history is a story of periodic convulsions of failure and breakdown followed by long periods of readjustment and renewal." Basically what he's saying is that American history, throughout time, we've gone through setbacks, but we've always came back and fought back harder. And while I understand the sentiment, I don't think us as Americans can afford another tragedy to sort of raise patriotism again. We saw the pandemic, and people thought that would bring us closer together, but I feel like it almost divided us more. Just look at our most recent election, for instance. So I'll leave you with this, a quote from Mark Twain. Patriotism is supporting your country all the time and your government when it deserves it. I think we focus a lot on that first half about always wanting to be nationalistic, always wanting to support the United States, but I think we often forget that last part, your government when it deserves it. Our government works for us, we don't work for them. We shouldn't just give them our support because we like the United States. They need to earn that respect and trust from us. And as we've seen through about the last 20 years, the United States has failed to earn that respect. Thank you.